Did you hear that? Okay, it should have said this meeting is being recorded. So just letting you all know that that is happening. Oh, perfect. Okay. All right. And we can see my screen again? Yes. Okay, perfect. All right, so today's agenda, we'll probably go close to noon, but we'll definitely leave some time at the end for questions and for you all to talk. But first I'll talk about why use a crock pot. Why do we have a whole class dedicated to it? We'll go over some foods, like overall food safety, as well as crock pot safety specifically. Some crock pot tips and tricks, how to prep a crock pot meal. We'll go over freezer meals, which is my favorite part. And then we'll even talk about some ways that you can use your crock pot for non-food reasons. We'll go through that, and we'll have a time for questions and comments. Sound good? And reminder, just unmute yourself. I definitely want, if you have a question, I want it to get answered or comment. So let's go over some Crock-Pot 101. So one of the biggest reasons to use a crock-pot is actually cost. It can actually save you money. And the reason why is for energy savings. So if you're using a conventional oven for 1 hour, that costs around 20 cents. But if you're using a crock pot for 7 hours, that's only 10 cents. So that's actually an energy savings of 50%. And so in the long run, that can save you a little bit. And so that's something good to know. The other big reason that crock pots can cut your grocery bill is because you can buy cheaper cuts of meat when you're cooking using a crock pot. Does anyone know why? Feel free to unmute.
Longer, so then it makes it more tender.
Yes.
So you need to buy better meat for that.
That's exactly right. Yes. So pretty much, yeah, the more expensive cuts of meat are the tender ones, right? But if you're using a crock pot, that's a moist heat cooking method where any cut of meat that you choose is going to end up being tender just because you're cooking it that way. And so you don't need to buy the expensive stuff. You can buy the cheaper cuts. In fact, it's better to buy the cheaper cuts. And so that can save you a lot of money, because does anyone feel like they spend the majority of their grocery bill on meat? I know I do. Yeah, that tends to be the most costly of our food items. So that's a great way to save some money. Another way to save money is you can use dried beans instead of canned beans. And that's actually a 60% savings just in itself. So, and again, because you're using a crock pot, they turn out just as great as they would if you're using it canned. And then also, some of you all are gonna laugh at me because I talk about this every time, but leftovers. Leftovers are a really easy way to save money, and it helps you if you're having a busy night for you to have something on hand. But if you have leftovers that you don't mind, eating again for lunch or remixing it to make another family meal, that's a great way to decrease the cost. All right? So that's one way, is cost. Now let's move to the fact that using a crock pot is super easy and literally anyone can do it. I'm not the best cook and I can do it. So I have complete faith that you can do it. So pretty much it's like the set it and forget it, if you've heard of that. And that's honestly what it is. You layer the food in your crock pot and then you set it. So the crock pot you'll be getting has settings. It'll have a low, a high, and a warm. You set it to what you need to, and then you can literally forget it. In fact, you should forget it, because we're gonna learn later that every time you open the lid to your crock pot, you add 30 more minutes of cooking time. Does that like blow anyone's mind? 30 minutes, so don't check it. Just, have faith that it's cooking the way it should be. And so we actually do wanna forget it. So it's set it and forget it. You can put everything you need to in your crock pot in the morning, go to work, do your things that you need to do during the day, and come home to a already completely made meal. Does that sound good to anyone? That is the best thing about the crock pot. Also, most slow cooker recipes, and I'm going to be using the words slow cooker and crock pot interchangeably, same thing, but they're usually not intricate to prepare, and they don't require like knowing specific culinary skills. All right, they're usually pretty easy. All you're doing is putting the stuff in the crock pot, and you might have to do a little prep first, but they're really something that you can feel confident that you can do. So we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But if you had a little bit of doubt at whether or not you could do a crock pot recipe, then I want that to be gone now. You definitely can. And then another great reason to use a crock pot is creating healthy meals. So we know that when life gets hectic, the first thing that we might turn to is fast food or going out to eat or having like a quick freezer, like TV dinner meal, that type of thing, which aren't always the healthiest. And we all know that when we're giving our families and ourselves a healthy meal, that feels good, right? And we want to do more of that. So some great things to make in your crock pot are things like soups, stews, oatmeal, overnight oatmeal, and all of that. And so you can feel really good that that's something wholesome and something that's going to keep your family and your kids full. Also, so if you think about it, you have your crock pot and the lid is sealed, right? And so nothing is escaping, nothing is evaporating. And for that reason, you don't need to be adding fat to your recipe, which makes it healthier. So you don't need to be adding butter and oil and that type of thing. And so that's a great way to help make your meal a little bit healthier. And it definitely, like I said, beats ordering greasy and expensive takeout. All right. Do we feel good? I can't see everyone's faces at one time. I wish I could, but thank you for all of you that have your videos on. Now I feel like I know it's a little different being virtual, but I feel like I'm teaching, so that's great. And then, okay, does anyone raise your hand if you like doing the dishes? Does anyone like doing the dishes? Okay, raise your hand if you don't like doing the dishes. Okay. Yeah. Dishes are my least favorite thing, especially after you've slaved away in the kitchen and you've made this great meal, not really with the crock pot, but you've been cooking and then you ate and now it's like the last thing you feel like doing at night is the dishes. And that is one of the best things about the crock pot, that it is a single dish, cooking, serving, and storing. So let's think about that. You're cooking everything in one dish. You can serve it out of the dish and you can put that crock right in the refrigerator to store it. So you have like one thing to clean up. And that is one of my favorite things about the crock pot. Also, you will be getting a crock pot with the removable crock. You can actually take it out of like the warmer part. So that makes it really easy to clean and to soak. And so, yeah, cleanup is really easy. That's another great benefit. And here are just some kind of pictures to get you excited about what you can make in your crock pot. Things like mac and cheese. I know that is a popular food item for your kids' age range. Also like beef stew, chili. I always make my chili in the crock pot. These are great things. And now that we're getting closer to the winter months, having like a nice warm meal to come home to is really nice. Okay, guys, so let's see how this goes. I have a video to share with you, and these show the most common crock-pot mistakes that people are making, all right? And then after we watch the video, I'm gonna ask you a couple questions, so make sure you're paying attention. And let's see if we can make this happen. Okay. Here we go. Thanks for bearing with me. Can we see this okay? Yeah, okay. Here we go.
Of cooking by hand when you have a slow cooker. Throw everything in there in the morning, then forget about it until dinner time. There's nothing better, right? But as easy as slow cookers are, they do come with rules. Here are some of the mistakes everyone seems to make when they use slow cookers, so you can be sure not to make them yourself. Taking a peek. We get it. Whatever's cooking in the slow cooker has your whole house smelling delicious. Gather up your willpower, though. You need to resist peeking inside. It took your slow cooker longer than you might think to work its way up to the target temperature, and lifting the lid for even a second lets out most of that hot air. Too much peeking means a reduced temp inside the slow cooker and more time needed for your dish to finish cooking. In fact, each time you lift that lid, you add 30 minutes to the time you need to cook your food. Using expensive cuts. Those fancy cuts of meat can certainly have their place at your dinner table, but there's no need to spring for the good stuff when you're shopping for a slow cooker meal. Since slow cookers cook low and slow, they make even the toughest meats tender and juicy. So grab a low-cost cut and let it cook all day. The resulting dish will be so fall-apart tender and full of flavor, no one will guess you bought the bargain beef. Not searing meat first. Be honest, if a recipe says to sear your meat before you drop it in the slow cooker, do you do that or do you skip it? It seems reasonable to skip it. It's going to cook all the way through in the slow cooker, right? Well, skipping the searing step does change the flavor of your dish and not necessarily for the better. According to the cooking site Kitchen, searing your meat before slow cooking it caramelizes the outside of each piece of meat, adding texture and an extra layer of flavor. If you've never seared your meat before slow cooking it, you really don't know what you're missing. But after you've tried it once, you'll never skip that step again. Cooking skin-on chicken. Chicken cooked with the skin in an oven or pan usually ends up gorgeous and crispy. When you're cooking in a slow cooker, you're probably going to end up with a soft, rubbery outside that's anything but appetizing. If you want to be able to serve dinner straight from your slow cooker with no extra steps, use skinless chicken when you slow cook. Fortunately, there's a workaround. If you don't mind the extra step, transfer the cooked chicken from the slow cooker to a broiler pan and cook it under your oven's broiler for just a few minutes until the skin is deliciously golden brown and crispy. Fresh versus dry herbs. With all the props given to fresh herbs, it's kind of refreshing to know that dried herbs are actually the preferred go-to seasoning in slow cooker meals. Since they do their best when cooked over long periods of time, dried herbs are the easy winners when it comes to your favorite slow-cooked recipes. That's not to say you can't use fresh herbs in a slow cooker recipe, just don't add them at the beginning. There won't be anything left when it's time to serve. Instead, toss those in toward the end of the cooking time, so they're still fresh and full of flavor when you sit down to eat. Using the wrong size. Slow cookers come in different sizes, and one slow cooker does not fit every slow cooker recipe. The cooking time on each recipe counts on the fact that you're using the same size slow cooker as the recipe directs, meaning it's filled to the appropriate level. Your slow cooker should be filled halfway to 3/4 of the way full. If it's not full enough, your food will end up overcooked. If it's too full, it may not cook completely, or you may end up with an overflow and a big mess on your kitchen counter. Adding dairy too soon. Dairy products don't do well warm, and the slow cooker is no exception. If you add ingredients like milk, cheese, cream, sour cream, or cream cheese too early in the cooking process, you'll have a curdled, disgusting mess at the end. To save your dish without sacrificing the creamy flavor you love, cook it without any dairy and then add those ingredients in during the last half hour, cooking them just long enough for them to melt and blend properly into the dish. Using too much alcohol. It's usually okay to use a heavy hand when cooking with wine on the stovetop. As heavy a hand as you want, really.
And then for Aunt Sandy, a bottle of white wine.
That's not the case with a slow cooker, though, because the lid stays on tight and nothing really evaporates. In fact, when you add wine to a slow cooker recipe, you'll taste more of the wine than you would in a stove-cooked dish. For that reason, it's best to skip the wine, or add it sparingly, unless you're really after that boozy tang. Cooking frozen food. As fabulous as it sounds, it's not a good idea to put frozen food, especially meats, in your slow cooker. If your slow cooker is full of frozen food, it'll take way too long to reach a safe temperature for consumption, meaning your food will spend longer than it should at temps that are less than safe. Don't eat that. Not layering correctly. Believe it or not, your slow cooker doesn't cook evenly all the way through. The foods at the bottom cook faster, so foods that need longer cooking times, like root vegetables, should go at the bottom of the slow cooker, followed by the meat, which cooks faster. Not greasing. Slow cookers may make cooking a breeze, but they can also make cleanup a pain. They usually end up soaking in your sink just as long as they spent cooking on your counter. And even then, you still need an awful lot of elbow grease to get them clean. Save yourself some time and use a cooking spray or a slow cooker liner to make cleanup that much easier. Thanks for watching. Click the mashed icon to subscribe to our...
All right. Was that helpful? Okay, we'll go into those tips a little bit more in depth, but I really like that video. Let me find my thing again. Okay. All right, so, all right. So we'll go through kind of what that video talked about a little bit more in depth. But first, I want to talk a little bit to you about food safety. At the beginning of class, many of you raised your hand that you've used a crock pot before, and that's awesome. Just want to let you know, though, not all crock pots work the same. Some of them have different settings. Some of them just are a little different sizes, all of that. So we do really suggest that you read the before use pamphlet that comes with your crock pot beforehand. All right, just so you know how it works. And that way you can get familiar with yours. Also, I would recommend that you, for the first time you use the crock pot, that you're home and you don't leave it and set it for the whole day. That's definitely something you can do. I would just say that for the first go around, be at home. That way you can, keep an eye on it. And then that way the next time that you can feel, that it's working correctly and that you can leave it and not worry about it. Does that sound good? Okay. All right. So this isn't specific to Crock-Pot, but it's really important that we go over it about the minimum cooking temperatures. All right. So we want to avoid foodborne illnesses at all costs, right? And how do we get that is when we're not cooking our meats to the proper temperature. And so what is the really only way to make sure that something is at the right temperature? Does someone want to unmute? What is the only way?
Thermometer.
Yes, that's the only way. Great. So unfortunately, you can't tell if something is cooked fully by looking at it. You just can't. And so the only way to know is by taking its temperature. I got a food thermometer at the dollar store. So if you don't have one, like you can get them really cheap. And how to do it is you put it in the thickest part of the meat, usually like in the center, and you kind of hold it there for a bit and make sure that it's at this temperature or above to make sure it's fully cooked and you're not going to get anything or pass any, bacteria on to you or your family. We don't want to get sick from that. So I'm just going to go through this a little bit. Honestly, if you just want to have a quick reference, you can print this out and you can put it on your refrigerator. But it does depend what you're cooking as to what the minimum cooking temperature needs to be. My main thing I try to remember is 165 because anytime I'm reheating something, like if you're reheating leftovers, it needs to be cooked to 165. So that's kind of the golden number. But things like steaks and roasts, they need to be at 145 or higher. Ground meats, 160 or higher. So you can kind of see, but just, just a reminder that that's really important to be temping your meat. Does that sound good? All right. Cool. So let's go over some food safety tips. And let's talk first a little bit about cross-contamination. So what I like to do, it's really important that, let's say we have a cut of raw meat that you're going to put in your slow cooker and you have it on a cutting board and you're going to cut it into smaller cuts. You're using a knife and a cutting board and then you put that in the slow cooker and now you have some celery to cut. And so you're going to use the same knife and the same cutting board to chop that up. Is that recommended? Yeah, that's not recommended. And the reason for that is all of the bacteria that you got on your knife and on the cutting board from the meat is now transferred to the fresh celery. And we don't want that. So I get this a lot. Well, everything is going into the same pot, right? And so that is true. That is true. But the reason that I'm saying this is we just want you to develop good habits with that now and always do separate cutting board and separate knife to have that so you remember it for future. But it's really good to, for me, I have 2 colored cutting boards at my house and I know one is for meat and one is for not meat. So, trying to do something like that, but that way we're not cross-contaminating anything. So that's a really good way to have good food safety. Also, the video talks about this, how we want to defrost our meat or poultry before putting it in the slow cooker. Okay, so not having something go straight from the freezer to the slow cooker. And the reason for that is because your slow cooker recipe, it is assuming that you have already defrosted your meat. And so if you're not defrosting your meat, The time for cooking, the temperature, that is no longer accurate. It's going to take way more time and all of that. So definitely defrost your meat, put it in the refrigerator the night before so you're ready to go. Although slow cooker recipes are really easy, you do have to plan for it. Like for defrosting your meat, you have to like plan for that, putting stuff in in the morning. So like plan for it, but once you have it planned out, it's really not too tough to actually execute. And then pay attention to temperature. So using your food thermometer, we talked about that. Making sure your food's fit. So the video also talked about this. Does anyone remember what the video said? Like, oh, actually, wait, it's on the slide. Okay. It needs to be half or two-thirds full. That is the recommended. So I'm guilty of this. I have a slow cooker and every once in a while I'm like trying to put the lid on and things are like overflowing. Don't be me. Don't do that because then the stuff at the top is not going to be cooked. And so just, think about that. The crock pot you'll be getting, I believe, is 4 quarts. So if you have a recipe that makes more than that, cut it down, that type of thing. And then cutting up your large chunks of meat. So I would recommend doing this just so it, again, cooks thoroughly. It's going to take less time if you cut it into a little bit smaller cuts of meat. So that's what I'd recommend doing. And then keeping the lid on. How much longer do you have to cook something if you open the lid?
30 minutes.
Yes, 30 minutes. That's a lot. And so not only, it's fine if you know this, but if you don't tell your kids and they're opening the lid and you're not aware of it, that might, it might not be ready on time. So just let everyone in your household know, hey, you got to wait, be patient, don't open the lid. I know it smells great, but don't do it. And then this is really important too. Nothing should be staying at room temperature for longer than 2 hours. Remember, 2 hours. Once it's been 2 hours, it either needs to be put in the refrigerator or discarded or something needs to happen, but it can't sit out at room temperature for longer than 2 hours without having the potential to cause foodborne illness. So just remember that. If you have your crock pot on warm, that's different. That's okay if it's sitting out for longer than 2 hours if it's on warm. It's just if it's like off and it's sitting there at room temperature. And then we want to store leftovers in shallow containers. Does anyone know why? It's kind of interesting. Okay, so pretty much when you have a shallow container, if you think about if you have a large, deep container, the stuff in the middle is going to cool off at a lower rate than the stuff around it. And that, again, might make the risk for foodborne illness go up. So in a shallow container, everything cools off at the same rate. All right, so just choose a shallow container if you have it. And then, okay, I always get a lot of questions about this. To not wash your meat or poultry. Did anyone grow up in a household where like your parents washed your meat or maybe you have been washing your meat? Anyone?
Turkey. I soaked the turkey.
Yeah. And that is what was recommended. And so that's really common. And recently, it has actually been shown that that is no longer the recommended practice. And the reason for that is when we wash our meat, all of the germs have now been spread to like not only our sink, but the surrounding counter area, possibly our clothing, possibly kitchen equipment. And so that's the reason we actually don't need to be washing it. But if you don't believe me, I want to show y'all a really short video about not washing our meat. So 1 second. Okay, you can all see this okay? All right, here we go.
Let's turn to good health now, to a recommendation sure to spark a spirited debate among home cooks.
Yes, tonight the USDA says most people are making a major mistake when they prepare chicken or other poultry. So we're bringing in Dr. Brayton George here to explain exactly what we're doing wrong.
Well, this is a great debate, Karen and Devin. You know, if the USDA says if you are washing off your chicken before cooking it, you need to stop. Now, you may think that it's making your chicken cleaner, but a new study shows you are actually spreading dangerous levels of bacteria from the raw poultry all around your kitchen and onto other foods that are being prepared.
Should you rinse raw poultry? Advice over the years has been conflicting. Even cooking legends Julia Child and Jacques Pepin disagreed.
I've washed this chicken with hot water. And if we take in
I won't wash my chicken.
But a new study from the Department of Agriculture has a definitive answer. Don't do it.
The sink can be a source of cross-contamination.
Using test kitchens, the USDA observed test subjects cooking chicken thighs, then preparing a salad. When subjects washed the chicken,
I just feel like it's cleaner.
26% transferred bacteria to the ready-to-eat lettuce. Most didn't attempt to clean the sink in between, but even when they did, 14% still were contaminated. Black light shows how far bacteria traveled.
How many times are you peeling a vegetable, you drop it in the sink, and you just pick it up and go on? And so at that point, you've cross-contaminated your vegetables.
Okay, we're not going to watch the entire video, but any comments about that? Kind of just something good to know, right? Because like they said, advice for that has been conflicting. And so at one point that was the recommended practice to wash stuff, and now they're saying not to. So just good to know. All right.
Is that really a thing? Because we barely eat chicken or any kind of meat, but we never wash out our meat. I didn't know that was a thing.
Yeah, if you haven't been washing it, then that's fine. Really, that was just for people who have been washing it and thought that was recommended, is to let them know that that's no longer recommended. But yeah, you don't keep eating it without washing it, and it's completely fine. Yeah, thanks. All right. Any questions about those food safety tips that I just went over? Okay, we'll get into the good stuff soon. Here are some crock-pot tips and tricks, okay? So tips for slow cooker meals. We talked about choosing the right cut and how the worst cuts or the cheaper cuts are actually the best cuts for this type of cooking method. So those types of cuts would be like the chuck roast, short rib, pork shoulder, lamb shank. Those are the fatty, tough cuts of meat. The okay cuts are more like the dark meat things, like the drumsticks and thighs. And then it says the worst cut. You can put chicken breast in there. You can put pork tenderloin, but the chances of it being a little bit dried out are higher. So you can do it, but most of your slow cooker recipes are gonna ask for one of those best cuts of meat. All right. So I did want to show you. Some of you won't be getting this, but most of you, I didn't have enough of this exact recipe book, but most of you will be getting this one. If it's not this one, it'll be another one, but you'll be getting in this along with your slow cooker. And this is really exciting. It's just 5 ingredients, everything. And on it, it's specific to slow cookers. So it'll have everything you need to know. It says how much it serves, the preparation time, and then it will say the cooking time. So depending on if you want to put it on low or high, it'll be different. Like it says for this one, the cooking time on low is 10 to 12 hours. On high, it's 5 to 6 hours. All right, and stuff like that. And this one says to use the beef chuck. And so you can see how it kind of will let you know, specifically the best cut for that recipe. So that'll be hopefully helpful. Another thing to know is to care for your crock. So if you have it heating, and then directly from it being really hot, you transfer it to the refrigerator. That's a really abrupt temperature change, hot to cold. And that actually might cause the crock to crack. That is hard to say. And we don't want that. And so what we recommend is after it's been heating, just have it sit at room temperature for a little bit before you transfer it to the refrigerator. But remember, not longer than 2 hours, because that's our limit. So just, so it's not like going from really hot to really cold. That's just something I'd recommend. Also, the video mentioned this a bit about browning. This is not, I would say, a essential step, but if you have a recipe and it asks for you to brown the meat, it adds to that like caramelized flavor if you're looking for that in your recipe. And that's just something your crock pot can't do. So if you want that deep caramelized flavor, sear it first on the stovetop and then transfer it to your crock pot. So that doesn't mean cook it thoroughly. That just means brown it and then transfer it to your crock pot if you want that. But I wouldn't say it's essential. Just go by the recipe. Trimming fat, that's a great way, again, to make the recipe healthier. You don't need the fat because it's going to be really tender. And it prevents the oil, greasy cooking liquid because nothing is evaporating. It's just going to sit there. So just to prevent that, I would trim the fat off. and adding dairy last. So if you add dairy at the beginning with all the other ingredients, it's going to curdle, and that's not very appetizing. So they recommend to add it in the last 15 minutes of cooking. So like anything dairy, like milk or cheese or anything like that. All right. And then also from the video, they said to watch the wine. Just like nothing else is evaporating, the alcohol won't be evaporating. So it's going to be really strong if you put alcohol in it. That's fine if you want that. I would just really use it sparingly. All right. So you will be getting like a specific crock-pot cooking book, but if you have a recipe that is not crock-pot that you want to adapt for the crock-pot, you can definitely do that, but there's a couple of things to know. So first off, certain recipes will be better to do than other recipes. The best things are soups and stews. You can also do braises and roasts. Also, you want to reduce the liquid. Again, I'm going to say this 20 more times. Nothing is evaporating, so you don't need as much stuff. So cut back by like 20-ish%, 20-ish. And then rein in those hot spices like the cayenne pepper and the crushed red pepper and stuff, because it's really going to be amped up in your crock pot. So you might need to play with this a bit, but I would not put what the recipe calls for. Definitely do like half, or you can kind of, like I said, play with it, and depending on how hot you like stuff, but I wouldn't put in exactly what it says. Also, if there's onions in the recipe, use half of that, because again, it's the flavor of the onions is really going to be amped up. And we talked about this, but food will only hold in the crock pot for 2 hours. And then if it's shut off, and then you need to do something with it. All right. So let's talk a little bit about crock pot prep. Has anyone done freezer meals before or heard of them? I feel like there was like a really lot of like hype about freezer meals at one point. I feel like a while ago, my mom was like, everything freezer meal. And I don't know why that went away, but it should come back, because freezer meals are a great way to do things, especially if you have like a busy household and you have a lot going on. It's just really nice when you have like a hectic day to come back and be like, oh yeah, I have that freezer meal. All I have to do, like, it's just really easy. So we're going to talk about that, how to do it. But we're going to talk about why do freezer meals, how they save time and money, how they allow you to spend more time with your family, how they're healthy, and then how they limit stressful evenings, so how you can plan ahead. So let's start with prep. So I think the best way to do freezer meals is to find a day that you want to prep for the week. So it's going to be different for everyone. Maybe Sunday is your prep day. Maybe you don't have a lot going on Sunday evenings, and that time you want to dedicate to planning for the week. That's a great way to do it. And so doing something like this, doing like a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and then putting what your main entree is going to be. And that way you have it all planned out. As far as meat goes, we talked about how that's an expensive part of our grocery bill. So buying meat in bulk and finding sales is a great way to do it. And then choosing recipes with that cut of meat. So I think meat freezes really well. So if you use that cut of meat and it's on sale, buy a lot of it, and then you just have it on hand. That's a good idea. So what freezer meals are is you put all of the ingredients that you need to make a recipe in a Ziploc bag, and then you freeze it. And so then, and the reason we're talking about this with crock pots is then all you need to do is in the morning, you take that freezer meal, you dump it in your crock pot, and then it's good. And then, you know, when you come home, it's ready. So there's a couple things though to remember for your freezer meals. First, you want to label. Does anyone have like random bags in your freezer that you're like not sure what it is? Because I definitely do. And if that happens, I'm just never going to eat it, because I'm like, it's been too long. I don't know what to do with this. So definitely label your Ziploc bag with like what it is, the ingredients that are in there, the time and temp you should cook it at, and then just like if you need notes. So like just write it all on there so you're not having to like find the recipe. Just write it right on the bag is what I'd recommend. Then you place all the ingredients inside the bag unless it is dairy. So do everything except for dairy. And then you flatten it to allow for easy stacking and easy thawing. And then if you decide the night before you want to use your freezer meal, just put it in the refrigerator to thaw. And so the next morning you can dump it in your crock pot. Does that make sense? Does that sound doable? I think that's a really great way to do it. You can definitely do these a while in advance too. Freezer meals are good for up to 3 months in the freezer. All right. So something to know about your freezer meals is you do not need to pre-cook your meat when you put it in your freezer bag. So that's really nice. It makes it a lot easier. The USDA said it's perfectly safe to store raw meat and raw vegetables together. And so the only thing, again, that you just don't want to do ahead of time is the dairy. But everything else, you can put your meat, you can put your veggies, everything, spices, you can put everything in there. And then you combine all the ingredients. You want to use a gallon size freezer bag. And then you want to remove the air so that nothing gets freezer burned. And then you can freeze it up to 3 months. So it's just a great way to prep ahead of time. Let's talk a little bit about how to be budget friendly. Choosing non-meat protein options. Something I talk a lot about is like we have a lot more meat than a lot of places around the world. We don't actually need that much meat in our diet. There's a lot of ways to get protein that are not meat, things like beans and peas and eggs and nuts and all of that. And so doing like a meatless Monday or choosing a night of the week that you're just not going to make meat the star and you're going to do something different. That's a great way to, make it a little bit more budget friendly. Also, in a lot of places in the world, meat is more of a condiment than the entree. And so that's something else to keep it more budget friendly, maybe not needing to buy as much meat as you are. And then again, eating leftovers. So making larger meals, making a little bit more than you need, that way you have it. And trying and avoiding convenient foods. So I talk about this in my Healthy Shopping on a Budget class, but anything that you buy that's convenient is going to be more expensive. Like if you buy a fruit platter and everything's already cut up, it's more expensive than buying the whole fruit, right? Or if you buy like a head of broccoli, that's going to be a lot more budget friendly than buying the broccoli florets. Or buying, they even have like already cut up meats. So if you buy like the meat and cut it up yourself, that's going to be less expensive. So every once in a while, it's nice to have that convenient stuff. But if we're talking about being budget friendly, doing the work yourself is a great way to kind of cut the cost down. Even like buying a block of cheese and shredding it yourself rather than buying the shredded cheese. Like anything that you're doing like that is really going to help. So try to avoid the convenient foods if you can and have the time to do it yourself at home. All right, thanks for sticking with me. We are almost done. I know that we have about 15 more minutes. I just wanted to make sure you all knew that you had other options for your crock pot that aren't food. You can actually use your crock pot as a humidifier. So that's kind of cool to know. And you can find, if you want me to email it to you, I can, but you can find this stuff on the internet. I'm not going to go through every step, but you can use it as humidifier. You can do slow cooker melted chocolate. I know I'm a nutritionist, but there's a time and place for melted chocolate. That's actually the best way to melt it rather than the microwave. And actually, I know the holidays are coming up, and a great budget-friendly gift would be to melt some chocolate in your slow cooker, put it into a mold, freeze it, and then give them out as gifts. Think about how budget-friendly that is and how cute and like creative and just kind of something to try, something that your kids can even help you with. And then Crock-Pot crayons. So we all have, kids, young kids. And does anyone have like a drawer in their house with just like a bunch of broken crayons that look like that? Like they're like not quite big enough to write with, but you're not going to throw them away. Well, this is a great way to make a bigger crayon. So you just put all of the little crayons together, put it in a muffin tin, you use a crock pot to melt it, and now you have a cool big crock pot crayon. So just like a fun little activity that you could involve your kids in. And then lastly, doing crock pot Play-Doh. I grew up doing this and it's really fun. You probably have all of this, all the ingredients already on hand. So that's a great thing to do. If you want to snap a picture real fast of this slide, definitely do it. But just kind of a fun activity when it's getting cold outside and you want to keep your kids occupied. And then also what you can do with your crock pot is you can double layer it. So if you have like a Pyrex pie dish and a dish towel, you can put a dish towel and then you put your pie dish on top, and you can like heat things up that way. Like you can put tortillas or waffles or anything you want to. That way it's just like if you're not trying to cook it, but you're just trying to heat it up, that's a great way to do it. You don't need to worry about the dish towel catching on fire or anything. But that's just kind of a fun thing to try. And tips on how to clean your crock pot. If you're done with it, like if you finish everything, try to, clean it right away so things don't crust up on it. But if they have, a great way to clean it is to use vinegar and baking soda, and you put it on low for 1 hour, and then it's really easy to wipe clean. Another way to do it, if you don't want any dishes at all, is they actually have these slow cooker liners at like every grocery store. They're just near the plastic bags, and you just put it in your crock pot, and then all you do is you just dispose of it, and then you have 0 dishes. So I mean, you have to pay for the bags, but if that's worth it for you, that makes cleaning a little bit easier. And that is like the main takeaways I had for today's class. Before we do questions, as you know, if you've taken a class with me before, we've got to make sure you guys are learning something, and so we can continue these. So how I'm going to ask for you all to do this is to put in the chat your answers to these. So like yes, no, or yes, yes, or no, no, or that way, that's going to be how I figure out, who attended the entirety of today's class to receive a crock pot. So first question, after taking this class, will you usually or always consider health when choosing groceries? And then after taking this class, will you commit to trying a new healthy crock pot recipe at home? So like I said, you'll be getting a recipe book. So will you commit to doing that now that you're going to get your very own crock pot? So I'm just going to keep that up for a second. I know we have a little bit, we have 10 more minutes. So I'd love for any and everyone to unmute. Let me know your thoughts, your comments, your questions. This is your time.
Hi.
Hi.
Just like wondering, I was just putting the question on the chat, but I just hear the answer, like about the cook liners.
Yeah.
Chicken liners. Like, do you actually like put it like the whole entire time when you're gonna have like the cooking on the crock pot, or is it, because I read it was saying there like an hour, so just like
so
doubt.
Before you start cooking, you put the liner in, and then you cook the food with the liner in it, so that way when it's done cooking, you just take it out and you can dispose of it. So yep.
Oh, okay, that's really easy and convenient. That way we have dirty dishes.
Yes, no, definitely. If you don't like dishes like me, it's a really good option.
Yes. Okay. Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else? Are we excited to use our crock pots? That was my goal for today, is to get you guys excited and make life a little bit easier. I know we tend to make the same things a lot, at least I do. And so this will hopefully get you excited about making some new recipes too. I also wanted to remind you all, oh no, we're not doing that. So crock pots are gonna be delivered to your child's classroom. Let me know if you haven't received it in like 2 weeks, but give it some time. Also, here are my nutrition classes that are coming up soon. I would love to see you guys again. And if you have ideas for new classes, I'm up for suggestions as well. My All About Sugar one is coming up very quickly. And then I have Kids in the Kitchen at the end of the month. Every month I have, 2 to 3 classes. So just keep an eye on Class Dojo. That's where I tend to advertise. It's also on the classroom calendar. And then you can RSVP to me. So now you'll all have my email. So feel free to email me or to let me know before you leave today, and I'll get you signed up.
I did try the black bean, the fudge.
Yes.
The brownies, that actually turned out pretty good.
Yes, because that was from the picky eating class, right?
Yeah, it was.
Yes. So if you weren't in the picky eating class, I gave them some recipes to try. And if you haven't tried black bean brownies, it doesn't sound the most appetizing, but you would never know they have black beans in them. And evidently they turned out really well. So I'm super excited about that. Thanks for trying it.
I tried them too, and I even brought them to work and let my boss and my coworker try them, and even they said they were really good.
You would never know. You would
Right?
never
really
know.
wouldn't.
I tried but brownies like twice, and they were like super dry and nasty kind of. And then I tried those with the black beans, and they were really juicy and delicious.
Yay! I'm so glad. Yeah, they do make them a lot more moist. I'm so glad. Anyone else? I want to make sure to answer all your questions. All right, well, I'm gonna hang out. If you have like specific questions for me, I'll be here. But if not, I'll let you go. So have a great Friday. Yeah.
So you said every time you open the lid from the crock pot, it takes 30 minutes longer, right?
Yeah.
Okay, because I used to have a crock pot like 2 years ago because I really wanted to try cooking with it. And I think I made like Brussels sprouts and some dessert in it, and it didn't end up good at all. So I gave it away because I was like, it's not gonna work. But it would make sense. I opened the lid like probably 10 times, and the Brussels sprouts were still hard after like 3 hours of cooking.
Yeah.
So I just thought I wasn't smart enough to use the crock pot, but now it makes sense, I guess.
Now you know the secret, because that was me too. Before I started teaching this, yeah, I would just like go over and like take a look and smell it and put it back down. So now you know, hopefully it turns out better this time around. Thank you all for chatting your answers. Again, I'm here. Thank you all, especially our new parents, but everyone for being here.